Yo, today what I want to talk about is how I met Billie Joe Armstrong. Billie Joe Armstrong is from a band called Green Day. Green Day is a hugely successful band. Met him in the year 2005. I was 15 years old, just got into the punk rock scene. And for those of you who are going to say, well, how did you meet Billie Joe Armstrong during the American Idiot era? He's successful and famous. Well, we're into punk rock, and punk rock, there's no concept of fame. That structure, that construct doesn't exist. This is what exists in punk rock. Me with a Siege t-shirt on. Siege. Two guys fighting in the picture. And hey, that guy right there is actually from a famous band that will remain anonymous. We didn't care about who was famous and who was famous, who wasn't and who was famous. All we cared about was the community. He was famous. This guy, he was famous enough for me, even though he was on the underground. You understand? See, punk rock is underground. Punk rockers don't want to be famous. Punk rockers don't want to be famous. They're anti-fame, anti-mainstream. We have our own network called DIY. We can go state to state. We can go to Guam, Puerto Rico. We can go to Europe. We can go to Africa. And there's a punk rock community that will embrace us. We have our own network. We don't need the mainstream network. So we were never impressed by famous people. But famous people wanted to come to our shows because they used to be punk rockers back in the day before they became famous. And they love coming to punk shows because it's the only place in the world that they can go to where they can actually be their self. They didn't have to worry about a bunch of people asking for autographs because we didn't give a shit. If Billie Joe Armstrong came to this show right here, we didn't give a shit. We did what we did. Fame meant nothing to us. If anything, people would have looked at him funny and said, he's a pop punker. Pop punk is famous. They're signed to major record labels. They get royalties. That's anti-punk rock. The hardcore punkers didn't like that. They didn't want to be famous. That guy did not want to be famous. He didn't want to be famous. They generated probably about $120,000 a year from selling records. That was good enough for them. It was about the message. It was about the community. It was about DIY. Do it yourself. They had record labels. We had our own infrastructure on the underground. We didn't need the mainstream. Now, Billie Joe Armstrong, I met him in Richmond, actually. He came to Richmond, Virginia, and he came to a venue called Alley Cats. Alley Cats, this is not Alley Cats in this picture. I have thousands of pictures. I was lucky to be in a lot of these photos. Tony, he was the guy who took the majority of these pictures. This right here is in somebody's garage. But Alley Cats was an official venue. It was a real venue. And Billie Joe Armstrong, he just popped up. And, you know, the show's going on. You know, I forget which band was playing. Some band was playing. And Billie Joe Armstrong is just sitting there with his arms crossed, looking kind of like he's away from the crowd. And I know who Billie Joe Armstrong was. I mean, I like Green Day, even though the majority of the people who were at that concert looked at him like he was this poser. I looked at him like he was cool because I liked this other band that he was in. What was it? They paved the paradise, put up a parking lot. Don't it always seem to go, 'cause you don't know what it's like to... Hold on. Don't it always seem... He was in some other band that I liked. I think they were called Pinhead, Gunpowder or something like that. And I seen them live. And I like Green Day, you know? Yeah, Pinhead, Gunpowder. Yeah, I like that band. I know one of the guys in that band. But yeah, Pinhead, Gunpowder. Pinhead, Gunpowder. And that was his connection to the punk scene. Because Billie Joe would actually perform with Pinhead Gunpowder when he wanted to get into the scene. And because what these famous artists would do, these famous pop punk bands, they would slide into the punk rock community, the real punk rock community with us, so that they can get a feel for things and so that they can get back to themselves, because they know we're not going to judge them like celebrities. We're going to ignore them and treat them like a regular concert goer. Cheers in New York, and I'm one of them. And you know, it's kind of like a poppy sound, and most punk rockers don't like that. But I didn't mind. I was never biased or discriminatory or anything like that. Never was like that. You know, I was always cool with anybody. I mean, to me, punk rock was more of a community, because you had the elitists who would say, well, he's not a real punk rocker because he likes pop punk. I don't care if you like pop punk, hardcore punk, whatever. You know, this is the band t-shirt that I had on. And that picture I'm listening to, I got this band Siege. So you can see the difference, right? Billy is more melodic with his music, and the stuff that I was into was a little bit more nastier. But anyway, Billy's sitting there. He has his arms crossed, and you got to understand, whenever celebrities show up to a punk rock show, the kids, as we call them, the concert goers, look at him funny. They don't come up to him because they want to prove a point. We're the real punk rockers. You're a poser. So I go up to Billie Joe Armstrong and I say, hey man, welcome to Richmond. I'm a big fan. Loved American Idiot. American Idiot was just released a year before. This is '05. Now, if you're saying, how did you just walk up to Billie Joe Armstrong and have a conversation with him a year after American Idiot was released? Because this was the punk rock community, and the construct and concept of celebrities didn't exist. Famous people came to shows all the time. I met a lot of famous people in rock. They would just get curious. They might be in town, and they say, hey, there's a show, Alley Cats, let me go check it out. And they loved to be in the punk rock community because we didn't judge them. Nobody asked for an autograph. We treated them like a regular person. So they loved it. They would love to go to the shows, and that way they could tap into the punk rock energy. In Richmond at this time, we were at the apex, like I explained to you before. We were at the top of the punk rock pyramid. We were the #1 most iconic place for punk rock in the whole entire world at that point, from '05 to '07, and that's a fact. And Billy knew that. So I go up to Billie Joe Armstrong and say, hey, man, I love Pinhead Gunpowder, man. You know, and he's like looking at me all funny, like, thanks, man, because he's expecting me to be a Green Day fan. And I said, I like Green Day too. You know, it's kind of poppy, but at the end of the day, man, I mean, see, I always had this conflict with the punk rock community because they hated pop punk. They hated bands like Blink-182, Green Day, because it was mainstream and it was poppy. Punk rock was nasty, underground. But my whole thing was, then we're just as biased as anybody else. If we have these biases and this tribalism, then how can we say we're better than the mainstream? So I was always friendly to people like that. And I was just, you know, hey, Billy, I'm a big fan of Pinhead Gunpowder, big fan of Green Day, man. Thanks for coming to the show. At 15, Billy was probably 30, 31. And he was cool with it. And he was like, thanks, man. You know, thanks, man. I was like, yeah, I love Pinhead Gunpowder, man. You know, and he enjoyed the show and I enjoyed the show. And I sat there and talked to him all night and we was chilling. And that's the night I met Billie Joe Armstrong. And at the end of the night, I said, Billy, be safe, man. You know how to get around. You know how to get back to your room. He's like, I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. I think he had a driver or something like that. And he was like a regular dude. Nobody talked to him. Nobody asked him questions. Nobody asked for an autograph. I was the only one who talked to him the whole night. Everybody else was trying to prove a point. Fuck Billie Joe Armstrong. He's a pop punker. He's not a real punk. So, yeah, man. Peace to Billie Joe Armstrong, man. And, Billy, if you see this, hit me up, man.